you know, being good. I guess if we have a this is a phrase I heard, an educated conscience, we would then we have the benefit of naturally gravitating towards what is good or kindness. But the thing is, isn't the test really when you don't want to be kind?
Absolutely. Very okay. Well, okay. Well, how about we'll talk about how about today we get down and dirty in human life as it really is. Right? Let's do it. You know, how about we? What you're saying is a wonderful thing. How many people here? You see, we know that in terms of our obsessive egocentricity, we measure everything. We're often enclosed in self-love. You know what I mean? Like what I want, what I wish for, what I hope for. And this is the underlying...
Smita, could you please pause? Could we all mute ourselves, please?
Okay. So we're caught up in a very egocentric self-love. And what I mean by that is, you know how Diana says, you know, I want, you know, right? So the thing is that we at any one moment, we are what we are desiring, what we're willing. Have you noticed that? That's what we are. You know, in our Western scriptures, they say, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. That's our heart. The emotional wanting, the emotional direction of our lives is our heart. Would you agree with that? Everything comes out of that. Okay, so let's imagine that and we're not actually aware of that. We're not actually aware that is what we are being. You see what I mean? So when we're looking at a human person and we're looking at the whole subject of transformation, we're looking at our heart, agreed, and we're looking at our understanding, because that's exactly what we are at any one moment. Have you noticed that? Okay, so if I, for example, am upset with Bob, right, and I am antagonistic or resentful or fault finding about Bob. Now, that fault finding, that urge to find fault, that emotional desire to find fault, that doesn't just happen without a context. The context is where my heart is. So, for example, how many people here have ever experienced the emotional desire or urge to have an experience where you're accepted and admired by other people? Okay, now that's a common one, but we're not necessarily aware that is the underlying dynamic that is moving us. You know, when we talk about emotions move us. So let's say that, so I am that very movement. My will, my heart is involved in a love for experiences that satisfy that, right? And then Bob comes along and says, Bede, you're a bit of an idiot. Or I hear that Bob said something bad about me, right? Now, straight away, how am I going to be seeing Bob? Bob's a horrible, bad person, right? Now, is that objective? No. That very perception of Bob is a function of what my heart loves. You with me? And my heart loves in that regard the experience of being admired or liked, for example. And the problem with that is there's an emotional dependence on certain types of external experiences. And out of that, our whole way of being in the world arises. So and when we look at the functioning of the psychophysical entity, its thinking, its feelings, its physiological reactions, and its conduct. Would you say that's true? So when dealing with Bob, I've heard that Bob's talked badly about me. I ring up Amanda and say, you know, that guy Bob, I mean, I like Bob, but I think he really, and then I start to try and attack Bob. But what the whole thing is, do you see how I'm being moved? But it's all based on the fact that I believe that the good of life, I believe the good of life is admiration and approval. Okay? Now, because I believe it's good, I can't help, and this is what St. Thomas Aquinas says, Diananda says the same thing. He says it in a different way. You can't help but will what you believe to be good. You can't help it. In other words, what you love has got you by the curlies. Are we all clear on that? Are we clear on that? Yeah, Sylvia?
And that's an example of a binding desire, right?
That I'm literally bound. But notice how it's my heart that's captured. You know how Diananda says we give away our heart to physical possessions, we give away our heart to people. There's nothing of our own left. It's all external. And it binds us because it binds the way we see, it binds the way we act, it binds the way we feel. It's quite a shocking thing, really. Okay, so this is, and you see, this is why you've heard that the whole purpose of karma yoga is to bring about two things: dispassion. Do you know what I mean? Like we have this passion for the world, don't we? We have a passion for certain types of experiences, right? And on a physical level, we have a passion to live forever, which is good luck for that one, right? We have a passion to stay as healthy and as human life and material existence is all there is, and we have an absolute passion to maintain and preserve it. And we have a passion for certain sensory experiences and certain interpersonal experiences. Do you understand what I mean? That will make me feel right in myself. And the only way I can feel right in myself is by satisfying these binding desires. This is, of course, without wisdom. So human beings, you know, when they, in our Western tradition, they talk about man being caught in darkness. Have you heard that saying? There's no light in his life. So the thing is that, so here I am, let's say that I'm not, let's say I'm highly desiring to be liked and admired and it's not working, right? And I want to change my life. Well, what do I want to change? I want to be successful at that activity. So I go and see Christian and say, Christian, you're an American, you know how to display yourself, and you know how to look good and all that stuff. Tell me how you do this. And then he tells me, okay, what you got to do is you got to make sure you listen to people, and you got to do this and this and this. And he teaches me social skills, right? And then I get better at that. So I get better at bragging. I get better at inducing in other people an experience of me that they'll like, and then I feel good. Have I changed? I've changed my behavior. But there's been no shift in the heart, has there? Because my whole orientation, my whole passion is to something external to me. That I need this experience in order to feel okay in myself. Do you see the emotional dependence? Right? So for each person, yeah, Christian?
Well, I've heard this referred to as impression management.
Oh, yeah, you're an American. That's good. Yeah, that's right. Impression management. Yeah. Okay, now, and the fact is it works. You can train people or help people function better socially. And by the way, I'm not knocking that. That can be quite good, particularly if you're socially challenged, right? But do you see that when we're talking about a shift in the individual, a transformation of the individual, if there's not a transformation of the heart, there is no transformation. Are we clear on that? Okay, so like when we look at, when you're looking at counseling and stuff like that, people have an obsession about being loved and admired. They have in a competitive culture, they've got an obsession about being bigger and better and more outstanding than others, right? And they've got obsession about being perfect. Have you seen people who just, unless they feel they're perfect, they feel bad? And so, and in terms of other people, they want to be treated well and fairly and rightly and justly and all of that stuff, which is, by the way, liking to be treated justly is fine. The problem is often you're not going to be. Right? So, see, Dayananda says, you can want as much as you want. He says desire is a privilege. But he says you have to understand that a lot of the things you desire, you're just not going to get. But our whole culture is built on the premise that happiness is getting what you want. And happiness is ego satisfaction. Do you see what I mean? So we have this. Yeah, Sylvia?
Sorry. And also that you think what happiness is. You think you know what happiness is. And you think you know how you're going to get it.
But see, you're actually unreflective in the sense that you just know that it's a completely delicious, wonderful feeling when people admire you or like you. That's it. Does that make sense? Or if you beat someone else, or you become, you're better at something else and you start to glow and glitter. You know what I mean? Have you seen religious people who when they talk about in the Christian tradition separating the goats from the sheep? Well, they love seeing themselves as the sheep and looking at the bad goats. They get a magnificent feeling of virtue about that. Do you see what I mean? So human beings, as human beings, when our life and being is cut off, we have a sense of life and being separate and apart from God. You can't help but be unhappy. You can have a life full of ego satisfaction. You can. And some people are very successful at gaining ego satisfaction. And then what happens is they get older and their friends start dying, and no matter what they do, they know where the destiny is. They know that no matter what they do, everything is passing. Everything is going to die. And so, maybe you can hope, well, I'm going to at least live till tomorrow, but there's hope. But you understand what I mean? Within the context of being a psychophysical entity, separate and apart, living in the world by yourself, and most people take their life and being to be the ups and downs of the satisfaction and dissatisfaction of binding desires. They expect the experiences that they've loved, that they've had, and that or the experiences that they hope for, or the experiences that they regret, they wish hadn't happened. Who's ever been preoccupied with that whole scene? Of course we have. And we take that to be our life, don't we? We actually take our experiences to be our life. So we take our experiences of ourselves and the experiences of the world as our life. And all of these experiences are shifting and changing. But when we come to a religious teaching, we're told that it might appear to be your life, but it's not your life. It's not real life. It is not the good. It just appears to be. And if you look at the whole, all of the spiritual traditions in terms of spiritual transformation, it is the discovery of what my real life is, and in such a way that I can live that real life while on earth. Are we clear on that? The whole point is, what is my real life? What is real life? But most of us are caught up into a greater or lesser degree. We're caught in the grip, aren't we? We're caught in the grip of passion for ourselves and passion for the world. Now, are we, and we're looking at, what we're looking at now is that this is a spiritual teaching that we're caught like that, aren't we? This is a spiritual understanding. It's not a natural understanding. Do you understand what I mean? The natural understanding is the purpose of my life is to survive biologically. That's the purpose of my life. That's the natural thing. And by the way, that drive's important. Otherwise, you run in front of cars and stuff like that. Self-preservation is good in that sense, the urge for self-preservation. But this urge to preserve our sense of our life and being as separate from apart from God and maintaining it and protecting it. How many people here have ever acted defensively when someone has said something they don't like? How many people have done that? Okay, would you say that's a ubiquitous experience? I mean, it's an experience that happens all of the time. What are we defending exactly? We feel we're defending our life. So when Bob says that I'm a bit of an idiot and I'm upset and I'm hurt, the thing is that, true, we're not talking about the fact that, the fact that it is true that it's an unkind thing for Bob to say that about me. Does that make sense? We're not talking about that. But here I am, I'm upset because I feel like I've been attacked. But what's the me that's been attacked? Some nice idealized version of myself that I want to be seen in a certain way in order to feel safe and secure. And Bob's put a hole in it. So what happens is we're caught in a tremendous subjectivity. And we're enclosed in it. We think we're seeing reality. Bob's an idiot. I genuinely believe he is. I'm thinking of him that way. Is that right? I'm having an understanding of Bob that he's an idiot. But what's that? And I'm hating him and want to retaliate in some way. If I can't retaliate to his face, I go and see Kevin and say, that Bob guy, I can't stand the guy. So I'm still trying to deal with it. Have you seen this happening all of the time in human life? It's just this whole mistaken notion that our life and being is this experience of ourselves. But for Dayananda, it's no more than looking at a snake. It's just a false notion. It's both based on false notions. But luckily, Dayananda, it's an experience, but luckily about it, what he said about greater thing about experiences? Experiences can go. But reality can't go. Reality is abidingly present. Do you see what I mean? So when we're looking at, so do you see how our hearts and minds are captured by binding desires? That's our heart, what we will, what we want. And our understanding is always a function of that will. Do you know what I mean? It justifies that our understanding. Yes, Bob's an idiot, and Steve's nice because Steve agreed with me that Bob's an idiot. Yeah, Sylvia?
Can you define reality for us?
But how Dayananda puts it, because it's there, you're seeing it. So what's happened is Bob has said something that I don't like. That's true, isn't it? That's true. But the fact that Bob is an idiot, is the life and being that is Bob idiocy, or is it a projection of my mind? So when you're looking at a snake, instead of a rope, that's a mistaken notion in your own mind that's been projected as experience, and as far as you're concerned, you're seeing reality, isn't it? But when my mind takes on the form of what's there, because it's there, I'm seeing it, I'm in reality. Not necessarily ultimate reality, but objective reality, Dayananda calls that. Okay? So when I look at myself, do I look at myself? Of course I'm not looking at myself. How can you look at yourself? I'm looking at an idea of myself. In fact, when you look at Dayananda's teaching, you can only be yourself. You can't think about yourself, because yourself is unthinkable, not describable, and you can't perceive it with the senses. But when we think about ourselves, we can perceive it. You notice this? When I think about myself, I've got a perception of myself. Would that be true? And it's conceivable. I can think about it. Yes, Bede, New Zealander, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Still good looking, even if they're only 68, you know, whatever. And the delusions that go with that. You see what I mean? Like, so am I looking at myself, or I'm not? I'm still in the world of appearances, aren't I? I'm living in the world of appearances. What seems to be. It's what St. Paul called the carnal mind, the darkened mind. Who's got their can you take off? Can you make sure you put? Can you put yourself on mute? There's someone here that's not on mute. Is it Catherine?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you put yourself on mute? Can you mute? You know how to mute?
Could I not fool around with this thing?
Oh, okay.
They're not.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. So what happened? So what happens is that on the bottom, if you know, Catherine, if have a look at the bottom. Can you see on the bottom of the screen? Stop video and mute. Oh wait, man, I think I can mute you. Just a minute.
Okay.
I can mute you. That's good. I'm so technically skilled. It's unbelievable. See how I'm having a notion of myself now? I did something successful. I go, oh, I'm so wonderful with all of this. So do you see that self-preoccupation isn't a preoccupation with reality? It's a preoccupation with ideas and sensory experiences and appearances that I take to be my life and being. Are we all clear on that? And my life in the world of appearances, and in our Western tradition, the person that made that first distinction between what appears to be true and what is true is Plato. You know, what the apparent reality and the real reality. What's apparent and what's real. What seems to be and what really is. Now, when we talk about the spiritual life, what we want to do is we want to see what really is. What really is. Because wisdom is a new way of seeing. Now, I'll just explain how wisdom changes us. And I'll give an example of a young fellow I was helping a while ago, right? He was having conflict and fighting with his wife, right? And he was pretty convinced that the reason that his marriage was no good was that his wife was just simply neurotic and stupid, right? Now, that was his understanding. Like he's not a bad person. He wasn't thinking that way to be vicious. He genuinely and utterly believed that his wife was his problem. Okay? And he also had a lot of binding desires. He wanted her to be like this and be like this and be like that and be like this. In other words, he wanted her to be in a certain way so he could feel loved and feel happy. Have you seen things like this before in your life? Okay? And he was convinced that this was true. So, again, the binding desire, do you know what I mean? I just got to have this. I got to have this to happen in order to feel happy. And, of course, I'm unhappy with her because she's not like that. Right? Now, when we were discussing the fact that we can't control people, there's so much we can't control. Would you agree? There's so much in the universe we cannot control. There's just so much. But what he can control is his manner of relating to her, can't he? Does that make sense? So what he's got control over. But so when we were discussing that, what would it be like that irrespective of what she says or does, even if she is emotional, irrespective of what she says or does, irrespective of that, would it be good? We were just getting the agreement on what is good. Would it be good if you could actually learn how to maintain a kind, cooperative, friendly manner, no matter what happens? Would that be good? So that in terms of you act in a harmonious, cooperative, loving, caring way, irrespective of what happens to the other person, right? Now, once through conversation or dialogue, once he actually goes, that would actually be good. I mean, because I said to him, do you want to be determined by her all the time? So she says something nice, you feel happy. She says something you don't like, you feel unhappy. Do you see how you're being a determined little robot? There's no freedom in that at all. So after the discussion, and we could actually see, yes, this is good. I may not feel like doing it, but it would be good if I acted in this way, if I related in a way that was happy, harmonious, and constructive. I mean, we all tracking with it so far? But an interesting thing happened when we did this. Once he really saw, you know what, this would be really good. So, in other words, what was revealed was what is good. That's what wisdom does, doesn't it? Wisdom, even on a natural level like this, wisdom opens our eyes to what is good, and then we find ourselves desiring that good. We can't will what we don't believe is good. Are you with me? Now, of course, he still had the binding desires, but what was interesting is that through wisdom, through an insight and an understanding of what was good, like what was dharmic, if you like, from a Hindu point of view, what was dharmic, because we have an inner striving to act in an ethical way. Because he saw that that was good, a new will was born in him that come from reality. It's not subjective. It's not subjective. It comes from reality. That's why the good of God in any of its forms, like even the understanding of what would be good and decent to do, comes from God. Dharma is the presence of God in the form of Dharma, isn't it? It's the understanding of what is good. Right? So when my eyes are opened to a good, I can't help but desire the good. Dayananda says, we can't help but value the value, can we? When the value of the value is valuable to you, it's your value. Do you see how there's a shift in the heart? Do you see how there's a shift in the heart? So what happens now is, before the basis of this person's cognition of his spouse, his cognition of what the relationship was like, his understanding of what sort of person his wife was, it all come from his binding desires, didn't it? I mean, if she did exactly what he wanted, she would be the most wonderful woman that you could ever imagine. You see what I mean? What? Delusional. That's so. But now, into his life comes a new will that comes from reality. And this is just the beginning. A new will is being born in it. And I'm talking about just an ordinary thing here. We'll talk about the spiritual thing. I just want to get this at this level so we understand what I'm talking about. So once a person has seen what is good, right? Do you see what happens? There's an urge in that direction. Is that true? Now, as Dayananda says, this urge isn't wholehearted. In fact, if I find myself just wanting to be kind, cooperative, and harmonious, just wanting to do it, then I'm wanting what I need to do, aren't I? Dayananda called this emotional maturity, when you want to do what you need to do. But he said before that, though, he said you got to fake it till you make it, because it doesn't come natural. What comes natural is our old way of seeing. What comes natural is our normal binding desires. But the only way we can neutralize binding desires is not by getting rid of them, but by outgrowing them. But we don't outgrow them unless we have a right starting point, which is the recognition of what is truly good as opposed to what appears to be good. As far as he was concerned, what would be good was if his wife changed and acted a lot better. Right? That's a problem, because often she's not going to, and you see the problem here. So what we have, and we'll only stick to this. We'll expand on it next. I was going to do more today, but we're looking at the discovery of the good. So there is the good that already exists. The good is then revealed by wisdom. Is that true? Whereby I suddenly have a recognition of what's good. And then if I've actually had a recognition of what's good, there'll be a shift in my heart. Do you see that? It's not wholehearted, it's the beginning. It's the birth of a new will, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It's the dharmic striving comes alive in me. You know the third striving? The actual will to act in a harmonious, loving and caring fashion. Are we all clear on that so far? Now, so this is where you know how Dayananda says that the dynamic form of the basic person is love and care. So when we talk about being loving, for Dayananda, loving meant being accepting. Being accepting. Now notice how I've got a situation now. Here's this guy. He's got a situation. He's got himself as he normally is, which is what? Bound by binding desires. Does that make sense? Now, so without Dharma, this guy is not going to dig himself out. Do you all understand that? But you know how Dayananda says we don't preach values, we preach the value of the value? Do you remember him saying that? We preach the value of the value. So now he's got a starting point, hasn't he? He can commit to this good. Okay, it would be good if I related no matter what happened in a kind, warm, cooperative fashion. All right? Okay, he ends the thing with me, he goes back home, and he tries it a couple of times. You mean he remembers? In other words, he has a will to try. And like what you said, Catherine, we don't grow emotionally when everything's going good, right? We grow when there's this friction between, or this dialectic that happens between choosing to be as we've always been and acting from an egocentric life, or responding to the voice of Dharma. In the sense that of what is good, responding to the good. You with me? So now, and how Dayananda put it is fake it till you make it. So what happens is his wife says or does something that he doesn't want. Now, at that point now, because he sees the juxtaposition between an egocentric response, a reactive, unkind, cruel, self-righteous. You know who's noticed that when you're angry you just feel so right? Who's noticed that? You feel so right, don't you? In fact, you're very wrong, but it feels right. So he's got you now. You know, we have a beautiful saying in our Western scriptures: "Choose ye this day which master you're going to serve." We can't get away with this. So you see. Who's heard of Kierkegaard? Who's ever heard of the philosopher Kierkegaard? Soren Kierkegaard, the founder of modern existentialism. He said a beautiful thing. He says, truth is never away from the situation of the knower. You know how people study spiritual life like that? Oh, yes, I'm studying on consciousness and I've got this and there's vasanas and everything's honky-dory, right? They can study it as a subject away. But when I'm actually seeing, and what's active in me is the understanding that I have to respond to this task in front of me, this task being relating to my wife, in a warm, cooperative, friendly manner, no matter how I feel or no matter what she says or does, that's directly impacts the situation of the knower, doesn't it? Does that make sense? It's not theoretical. So I have to live this. So I've got this choice. So well, then what happens is the wife says something that he doesn't like, right? Now, do you think that this guy responded perfectly every time? Absolutely not. Often he would forget the wisdom. Do you see what I mean? He'd forget the wisdom. The only way that you don't forget wisdom is by living it. Does that make sense? If you want to establish a wisdom in you, you must live it. Do you see what I mean? Like, you can't just go, like Dayananda says, you cannot go straight to Satchitananda. At moments, sometimes at moments, we find ourselves actually living, like, obviously the end, of course, is the important thing, is that, you know, this life, light, and fullness that is God, when we are living that life, light, and fullness as our life, that is freedom, isn't it? Of course it is. But there's an intermediate step. We need to reform. We need to reform our attitude, our understanding, and our external behavior. Wouldn't that be true? Does that make sense? Now, we don't create the peace of God, but if I'm full of conflict and I'm relating in a fighting and attacking way, will I be able to become aware of the peace of God? Will I? No. The peace of God is always here, by the way. The life, light, and fullness that is God is abidingly present. But it can't obtain in us while we're fighting. We can stop the fighting. But that doesn't produce the peace. The peace is already here. But what I've found in my own life, and I've found in the life of the people that I've been dealing with this subject, as they improve their conduct towards the person that they're having trouble with, their understanding or their way of seeing of the person improves. They're no longer a stupid biddy or whatever. Yeah, Sylvia?
And that also goes for internal fighting with yourself too. It doesn't have to be fighting with someone else, right?
That's the whole area of karma yoga, yeah. We need, fundamentally, the whole point of karma yoga, it brings us into a harmonious relationship with ourselves, other people, in the world. It's a wisdom that does that. And it's a wisdom we have to live. Now, is it easy to live a life of karma yoga? No, it is not. Of course it's not. Because here you are, you're screaming, you just want to, you know, who's ever had that thing, you just want to say something back, you just want to act defensively, you want to attack. Who's ever had that? And who's ever satisfied that desire? Right? So what we're talking about, here is this. Look at the triad again. All good comes from God. Would you all agree with that? All good comes from the life, light, and fullness that is God, which ultimately, by the way, that is our life. That's our real life. That's what we want to really establish in we want to actually live that understanding, because then it's non-dual knowledge, isn't it? When I'm living the life, light, and fullness that is God as my life, there's no duality in that, is there? I'm not even, at that point, I'm not even thinking about what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false. You know, I'm not doing the spade workers. We sometimes have moments of that, don't we? But that is the end we're going for. Are you with me? That is where spiritual life is culminated. In our Christian tradition, we call it union with God. You know what I mean? The Hindus call it moksha. But the important point here is this: the idea that we can live a spiritual life without virtue is ridiculous. Ridiculous. We have to conform our life to the good. Does that make sense? St. Thomas Aquinas said, what's the good? You see, when in our culture these days, we don't really have an understanding of the good. But St. Thomas was three things. It's an ethical good. It doesn't harm yourself or other people. So what makes something good is it doesn't harm yourself or other people. It's useful and it brings value into the world. And also it results in human happiness. That's pretty good, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And he thought that it would be a good idea to concentrate on the good. Of course it's good to concentrate on the good. But we have to first of all acknowledge that we're not really that interested at the beginning because we have a passion for ourselves and the world. Is that right? You know how they say that the most important thing in Vedanta is the distinction between is dispassion? Because there has to be a shift from being self-absorbed and interested only in the world, a shift in our Christian tradition is a shift from self-absorption and love of the world to love of neighbor and love of God. The Hindus would say there's got to be a shift from living a dharmic life and towards moksha. Does that make sense? We have to love so the thing is that unless the shift occurs within the individual, and that's why you need a spiritual teaching, because you notice that with a spiritual teaching, a whole range of cognition opens up for you, doesn't it? Like, for example, it's not me. It's not my wife that's the trouble. It's me. It's centered on me. That's a spiritual understanding, isn't it? It's a spiritual understanding. It's not, that's different from living the fullness that is God, which is above that, isn't it? This is the spade work in the middle. You've got natural life, which is material life, where we see things just simply through our material eyes. We come across a spiritual teaching, our spiritual eyes are opened and a whole range of things come up. We start to see our fallen state, don't we? We start to see that we're fallen from the good, or that we're acting in what. How important do you think it is to perceive that right now I'm being caught up in my self-absorption and love of the world, and that's really my problem? How important is it to be able to see that? Am I going to see that if I'm blaming people for my upsets? I can't. So we have these three things. So even if we just get this one point, what creates the shift in the heart? Which is what brings about a new will? What brings about the dharmic striving to come alive in us? What is it?
Seeing the good.
Very good, Kevin. You go to the top of the class. And then, but notice how without wisdom, without the unfolding of a meaning, what does Swami Dayananda do to us? Even though he's dead now, right? What does his teaching do? What is it? It's an unfolding of a meaning that where you can see what's good, and therefore it shifts your heart. Is that right? Any spiritual tradition, if they do this, this is what counts. Are we all clear on that? So when we're looking at
but can I just say something too?
Yep.
On the other hand, also you see when you're not being good, you see how you're getting caught up in life, and you see
that goes with it. Now that's a very good point, darling. People think it's negative
because we might not be able to see the good, but we can certainly see when we're caught up.
That's exactly right. Do you see what I mean? So what we know, for example, how important do you think it is? You know, when Socrates says an unexamined life is not worth living. Who's ever heard this saying, you just have to be aware? Who's ever heard that one? Awareness. There is the being the life, light, and fullness that is God, right? That goes beyond spiritual perception, doesn't it? Because you're being the knowing and all of that stuff. But in terms of the spiritual cognition, we need to see that. Am I going to move away from darkness if I see it? If I don't see it, like when I was talking to that young fella, he genuinely believed that his thinking was right. He was in darkness. So you have to sort out what's true and what's false. You see, when we're talking about this level of preparation, you see, the spiritual life is a journey, isn't it? from darkness into the light, or as Plato would call into the good, right? That's what spiritual life is, irrespective of the teaching or whatever. But in order for spiritual light to happen, it has to shed light on our life. So it doesn't only shed light on the fact of when I'm actually relating, I can see that I'm relating harmoniously and happily with my wife now, despite what she says or does. Or I can see now I'm acting cruelly and harshly. Can you see that the very seeing that I'm acting cruelly and harshly is so important? Because that will turn me. In the light of this new will, I'll go, oh, and I will want to correct, won't I? But if I'm not clear on what is good, can I see when I fall away from the good? Can I see it? So if I don't will the good, right, which is a gift from God, the very fact that I want to live a loving and caring life, Dynanda, it's a third striving, isn't it? Do you see what I mean? This is the only thing that changes, our heart. That's why wisdom is so important. When we look at Swami Dayananda or whatever religious tradition you're talking about, the whole purpose of it is to unfold what is really good as opposed to what we think is good. You see, do you know that when we're attacking someone, we actually think that's good, otherwise we wouldn't do it? Do you see that? So what happens is we take to be good all of these substitutes. We've got substitute goods that are a substitute for good. Do you know what I mean? Being liked, being admired, being and being better than other people. All of this we see as good. We're caught in this. Do you see how it's very important to be honest about what we're caught in? Does that make sense? That's grace. And we don't have to worry about whether we'll see what we're really like. When you commit, for example, to relate in a harmonious, kind, and cooperative fashion to every human being, do you see, like, how many people here have had the experience where they lose their kind eyes? Do you understand what I mean? Where you're watching some politician on TV and you go, what a bloody... Who's ever done that? Does it feel delicious? Of course it does. Because we can project our guilt. You see, when you're hating people, you're freed from your self-hatred. It's fantastic. It's a great way of dealing with it. But do you see what happens to you? But when you're looking at, even if you don't approve of what the person is doing or what is happening, if you remain with kind eyes, do you see how you're not getting lost in it? Are you with me? You're not being lost in it. I know when I'm acutely aware of when I lose my kind eyes. It's easy for me to do that, right? And it can feel so right and righteous when I do. Are you with me? But it's not. So this commitment to the good, there's the commitment to the good and the living in conformity with it is what establishes and grows the will. So eventually it becomes wholehearted. Do you see what I mean? And that means that I now want to do what I need to do. I love being loving. You know how sometimes you notice that you love being loving, don't you? It's not that you're doing it to be nice or to get approval. You just love being that way. Because whether we like it or not, the more we're like the image and likeness of God, does that make sense? The more we are being God-like, that is the only real happiness there is. All the rest is nonsense. But is it hard? Of course it is. So do you see the whole point with it? And that's why karma yoga is so important. Do you know what I mean? Learning to remain the same and working with these 4 factors, which are universally denied in our culture now. We have to work with what is right, what is wrong, what is true, and what is false. These are our tools, aren't they? And when we forget them, we recover them. You can be feeling in a really dark state, and then you do what Dayananda calls highlighting. You go, okay, let me consciously and deliberately look at my life in the light of the teaching. Now let's have a look. Okay, so here I am, I'm miserable. Now, why am I miserable? Well, I'm miserable because I feel like I'm cut off from God. So right now I'm an atheist. Do you know what I mean? But I know that God exists, but cognitively he doesn't exist for me right now. But basically he's here, and he's always embracing me. And as I'm contemplating this, I find myself changing. So I'm turning to the good. And then when that good is seen, that I'm always being embraced by God, I then find myself being peaceful. Are we clear on that? Do you see what I mean? That's what Dayananda calls highlighting, where we see ourselves caught up in a state and we turn. What are we turning towards? We're turning towards the good through wisdom, aren't we? Does that make sense? And then what happens is, when we reacquaint ourselves with the good, of course, we can't help but will towards the good. And if there's a shift in our heart, there's a shift in us. This is what changes us. Are we clear on this? Doesn't matter what people say, but Swami Dayananda says you cannot go straight to Satchitananda. So within the human being, you've got the natural level, you've got the spiritual level, and in the Christian tradition, they talk about the celestial level. And the Hindus talk about you've got you've got a life that's without Dharma, then you have a life of Karma Yoga, and then you have Jnana Yoga, don't you? There's levels within the human being. How many people here sometimes find themselves in the natural level where God isn't present and they're just caught up in they're caught up in it, right? Then what happens is you can shift and you find yourself in the spiritual level, don't you? And you're working with Karma Yoga and all of that stuff. And then occasionally you find yourself on that higher level, don't you? Do you know what I mean? It's up and down, right? But this is our journey. All right. So, Michelle, what's the thing that stands out for you today?
Well, I liked when you were talking about the wisdom part, because I think it's the only way that you can try to.
I can hardly hear you, Michelle. Sorry, I can't hear you properly.
Okay, so my computer had some work done, so I have no idea what.
Yeah. Now that's clearer, by the way. You're closer to the mic.
Okay, so when you were talking about wisdom, because when we focus on the good, there is also the part of us that can become proud of us being so good. But with the wisdom, it keeps us in check. So that's what I learned today, that the wisdom was really key in keeping us humble through this process, because it's very slippery in a way.
Yes, wisdom is given to us. It's not ours. In our Western tradition, St. Thomas Aquinas says, wisdom is an attribute of God, so it's given.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Very good. Stephen, one of the most famous sinners in the world.
Somebody has to uphold that position. Yes. Thank you. So, yeah, we started with the binding desires, and it's much clearer now. Binding desires are basically maintaining our self-satisfaction in ourselves, no matter what. We just want to maintain that sense of self-satisfaction.
I want. Yeah.
Right. And then there's we know when we're doing wrong, or at least, I think we do. And then there's that shift. So I appreciate that shift, and that shift in the heart, seeing the value of what's good. And you're often talking about how we treat other people. And I like when Sylvia came in a couple of times, she said, well, it's our inner stuff too. It's I more see that dissatisfaction with just myself walking around, and I'm just dissatisfied with how I do something or how I am being. And so, and what I have been doing is just recognizing that, and just understanding that that's what's real for me, and appreciate the reality of it. That that's the given. So the given and the giver are the same. And I can't say I'm really successful at, have overcome those feelings of dissatisfaction, but I understand the tools. And that's what's the most important thing to me. is to understand the process here, especially, you know, like you said, that the different strivings in life, especially in India, are what are there? There's not pleasure, security, pleasure, and then
pleasure,
dharma,
and
then dharma,
and God, moksha. Yeah.
Right. So what we're doing now is trying to develop that dharma and knowing what is good. Now, of course, I'm also interested in moksha too. We don't talk about that, but I'm assuming that moksha will be sort of the outcome of developing the value of dharmas.
When the qualities of God obtain in you as your very life, that is freedom itself. Right? That's higher than the karma yoga thing of working with good and truth and all of that. Do you see what I mean? So but one thing I can say, Stephen, is that the level of karma yoga, let's say, for example, you notice yourself in an unpleasant state. So first of all, in order to move away from a state, we have to recognize it, don't we? So we recognize that we're looking at the world through material eyes and we feel dissatisfied and upset. We need to look at the world through spiritual eyes, which the karma yoga level is we're practicing looking at it through spiritual eyes. So we can go, okay, I understand now I'm unhappy. And then I can do this in any way. I can recall, you know, that Dayananda says, you recall the words of the teacher. So you recall it, let's say, so you consciously and deliberately recall the fact that I'm embraced by the presence of God as I am. And then you just contemplate that fact. Does that make sense? Then you will find,
that's really good.
Then you will find, because the wisdom opens you up to the good that is God, that God's presence is the ultimate good, you'll find yourself shifting out of that state. Does that make sense? So we can do something. We literally go, we fully recognize, I'm caught up and I'm feeling miserable and horrible. And then we turn, don't we, to God as we are. And we say, you know, please let me, you can pray to, please let me see the reality of you right now. Do you know what I mean? So.
Just to know that we're embraced by God all the time, even in those, I mean, especially in those times.
Yes.
When we're feeling good, we don't observe this, we don't notice it, but it's when we're feeling dissatisfaction is when we sit and we know the value of understanding, I am being embraced by God right now, as I am.
Yes. And the thing too, our only solution is ultimately because, the life, light, and fullness that is God is moksha. So when that life, light, and fullness is being lived as your life, maybe that's what real freedom is. Now, we have tastes of that, but we're talking about working at not the fourth level of the fourth is moksha, but dharma. Dharma brings about harmony, and it frees us from conflict with ourselves, other people in the world. That's its whole purpose. So we can live harmoniously. Because now we're more, and out of that comes born a contemplative disposition. What that means is, I just simply love to be being. I love to be being. The disposition.
Well, that's a wonderful attainment right there. Yes.
That's exactly right. What blocks that is we are obsessed and we have a passion for ourselves in the world, you see? So the problem isn't external. It's because I love myself and love the world so much, I can't really love anything else. That's why we need to be freed through wisdom and have a new will. Does that make sense?
Oh, understood. Yes.
Okay. Well, good.
Thank you.
Good, Stephen. Catherine, you caused today's theme. I'll just turn you on, Catherine, just a minute. Oh, God. Can you unmute yourself? Do you see a little red? Do you see a little red micro? Oh, yeah. Good.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay.
You're becoming very technically skilled, Catherine.
Yes. What I was thinking was that I like to usually in the morning study scripture and pray, and I think that it's an interaction, because I can do that, and then, but unless you can transfer that into your reactions, your actions. In my cases, with my husband, he's the person I see in the morning. It's this kind of transferring that going to God, and then bringing that into other things. Other things.
Yes.
And that's what occurred to me.
Living the good is the spiritual life.
Yes.
So and all good comes from God. So when we live the good in any way, that establishes the good in us, if you know what I mean. And you know what Diana said about marriage?
Yes.
He said marriage is yoga. He said that because in marriage, like when you look at your life, it's really your direct relationships with your spouse and your friends and all of that. So that's where we're revealed. Does that make sense? And in the marriage thing, everything is revealed. There's no, all our spiritual pretensions go out the door because we see ourselves really as we are. We see our infantile demands, our irrationality. It's magnificent. It's a magnificent field for yoga. Yeah. Okay. Good, Catherine. But that's good. The thing is that how Dayananda put it is we first of all have to have the wisdom, but then he says we must live the wisdom. This is why he was such a profound teacher. He wasn't stupid. Yeah, very good. Bob Lee. Bob, I can't hear you, Bob. You got to turn.
I'm thrilled. It became a couple of easy things first.
Yep.
I think isn't it the myth maybe that Socrates was very henpecked, that he had a wife that was a real difficult to deal with.
She was a shrew. Yeah.
So that's sort of so that was sort of made clearer in your talk, or it made more sense in your talk. And the other thing is that the need to go through Ishvara and not sort of jump to moksha or liberation. That also is clearer from your talk because of the sort of the refinement and the change in attitudes that are necessary to sort of come to appreciate the value of these refinements. And then on a personal note also, it's clear to me that my trigger is when I feel I've been unfairly criticized.
Right.
And so that's what I have to watch.
That's a revelation of your incessant self-absorption and vanity, actually spiritually. You'd never say that. If you said that out in the world, that'd be being harsh. But that we've all got the same problem, Bob. Do you know what I mean? We've got a tenacious, and the only thing that lifts us out is wisdom, because it creates a new will, because our orientation shifts from being a consumer, gimme, to being a contributor. In other words, my job is to bring value into the world. In other words, to be good. Yeah.
And the other quick thing I'd share is that I've noticed how much my expression and the way I speak reflects his self-absorption. So that's been sort of a really interesting, and slowly I'm sort of catching myself in terms of how my language just reflects this self-absorption.
Yeah, and notice how with Karma Yoga, what we're doing is we're dealing with our external behavior and the manner we relate and all of this sort of stuff. Whereas the moksha part or God part is being. Do you see what I mean? So it's a different level. But what Dayananda says is that without karma yoga, there is no moksha. But moksha doesn't cause. Karma yoga doesn't cause a moksha. So, for example, the fact that I eliminate friction from my life, I cease to be in friction with myself, others, in the world. That's my job. That's self-reformation. It's my job, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
But the actual being drawn into the very life of God itself, that's God's job.
And I'll just throw in one quibble.
Yep.
So to maintain my record of always quibbling about something.
Good. Yeah. I've been missing that, Bob. Really. Yeah.
All right. The only quibble is when you call happiness that nonsense, because, and I know you do it, for good effect to draw distinctions. So, but
okay. I'll be clear on this. I take what the Greeks say, right? That there's ego satisfaction and ego deflation, ego inflation and ego deflation. In our culture, we think ego inflation is happiness. What the Greeks said that happiness was, and St. Thomas Aquinas says what happiness was, and Dayananda says what happiness is living a life of Dharma. So when I'm actually living in a way that's contributing and bringing value, and that I'm being harmonious in my actions, that is happiness. So that is the real stuff, because it's a consequence of living and functioning rightly. That's a lot different from, so thanks for the quibble. Okay.
You're welcome.
That's all right. I've been missing the quibbling, Bob. You've been too polite and too nice. It's been too hard for me lately. Okay, Catherine, Amanda, Amelia.
When you were speaking,
Can you speak up a little bit, Amelia?
when you were speaking, what came to mind, I was thinking of the past week.
Yep.
And it wasn't so much reacting in a negative way or being unkind or anything like that. It was seeing the state of the mind. And the state of the mind was foggy,
Yep.
or tired. And of course, then I believe myself to be those things.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you you said something a little bit about this, and you almost offered affirmations. So I see myself being, I don't know, caught up in the mind or tired or something like that. And then what do I say to myself? I see it. But what should I?
It's not so much say to yourself. You recall the recognition of truth that you've had when you're maybe reading the scriptures, or when you recall the teaching. You might recall the fact of, like in our Western scriptures, the saying that thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee, for example. And so that you basically turn. Actually, next time I'll go through this process of how our own inward states that come about, not so much the friction and whatever, but I'll remind me to do that next time we meet up, okay? But we're not doing self-affirmations. We're shifting our attention to the truth of something. Does that make sense? So the spiritual truth is, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. So when we shift our attention to the presence of God and we just wait patiently, we find a shift. Do you see what I mean? So but we'll next week we'll deal with this whole subject of highlighting. All right, that'll be good. All right, very good, darling.
And it's next month, not next week, by the way.
Oh, next month. Oh yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Okay, so I wrote a couple of things just to remind.
I hate being corrected. Oh, sorry.
You say for your word, darling.
Oh yeah. Ring her neck. Yeah.
All right. So what came out of today's talk for me was that we're always being determined. every minute of the day, but what are we determined by?
Quite.
And that's our choice point.
Yes.
So that's, and also, like, when we are being determined by God or the good,
Yep.
that is moksha. Might not be the ultimate moksha, but for me that is freedom, because
Well,
I'm
yeah,
not being determined by the world.
Relative.
So for me, that's
it's
already shows me how different things are when I'm being determined by the good.
Yeah. When the good of God is finitized in the relative world, and that's very specifically useful to you, it's relative freedom. There's always a freedom when we conform our actions to the good. Always. Very good.
So I don't really have to, like what Steve brought up. Just a point, Steve. I don't really have to worry about moksha. Moksha will worry. It will worry about moksha. It will worry. What am I trying to say?
It'll take care of itself.
Exactly. It will take care of itself.
Yeah.
What I need to, what I can work with, though, is what I've been determined by right here, right now.
Yeah.
And then leave the rest up to God, if you like. Or...
Yeah, you can do your job, which is this whole karma yoga, working with right and wrong and true and false, and conforming our actions to what is good and all of that stuff. That's something you can do, right? But the life, light, and fullness itself, you can't do God. So but when we're drawn into the very life, light, and fullness that is God, and that becomes our life. In our Christian tradition, we call that union with God. In the Hindu tradition, they call it moksha. The main thing that Dayananda outlined was meanings that are universal. There's various ways of talking about it, Christian ways and Hindu ways and whatever, but what's important is to see the meaning, because that's universal. That's why
I had an image, and I don't know if you relate to this or if anybody will relate to this, but I had an image of an octopus that we stuck to the world through our tentacles, and to see that and to let each one go, and then it will maybe get stuck again, but to get rid of the octopus. I just came up with.
Well, that's right. We're holding on, but because wisdom reveals the good, and if it's actually wisdom itself, the release in the heart is our will is shifted. So we have less passion for the world because we're taken over by a different will. We come under the governance of Dharma, as the Hindus would say. Yeah, very good, darling.
And sorry, one more thing, if you don't mind. I'm in a talking mood today. Yeah. But what Catherine was saying, that you and I sit in the morning quietly for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And if we have time before we go to work, we read some book or other, spiritual book, of course. And how important that is, because it's a reminder of what is, before we get into the world, what is truly important, and so it kind of sets the day, the tone of the day.
It does, and then you've got to measure. You can tell when you fall away, because it's easy to forget. You see what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to forget. Yeah, very good.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
Kevin, stop laughing, Stephen.
There's a lot in this. Even the binding desire, that wanting other people to be a certain way, highlights a whole world for me. And but what's fundamentally interesting, or core to this talk, seems to be this idea that it's only through this light of God in the form of this wisdom just shows me what is good.
Yes.
And that transforms my will. And without that, Dayananda would say, I'm just in subjectivity. It's just going to be further conditioning any teaching I'm exposed to.
Yes.
And it's interesting that subjectivity is a thought-mediated world full of notions, ideas, mental representation of myself, others in the world, whereas this light isn't thought mediated. It just shows me a meaning without me thinking.
Shows you reality. Wisdom shows you the reality of what is truly good, which lifts you out of the world of appearances. And also we begin to understand, with spiritual understanding is so much different than the whole idea that I am what I think about myself and my experiences. That my life and being isn't that. That's not my real life and being. That's the most important part, because we need to be lifted out of that idea, because it's a gross misidentification. It's taking myself to be, my life and being to be what it's not. We're told in all of the scriptures, our real life and being is the life and being that is God, and that's a fundamental end. And what we're doing is moving towards that. Do you see what I mean? So once what they say, conversion, the Vedanta says conversion is when we want to know God as opposed to believe in him. That's when we start, that's our conversion. And then this whole process of knowing God, you can't know God as an object away from you. It's like when wisdom obtains in you, it obtains in you as your way of seeing, so it's non-dualistic. Wisdom is always non-dualistic. It's not like I know that, it's I am seeing differently. And it's my seeing. So it's not dual. It's not like I know that. It's a way of seeing that comes alive in me. Yeah, that's very good, Kevin. Yeah. Christian.
Hi. Yeah, I just had a couple things. A lot of it's already been covered, but I was just I enjoyed the idea that when you're trying to convince somebody of your values, you're actually selling them the value of the value, which, it's kind of obvious in a way, but in another way, it's a great little distinction. And the other thing that I wanted to say that kind of struck me, it was not something that was completely new to me, but I liked the way you covered it, was the idea that when you're really judging and getting angry at, say, some politician, that it's just distracting yourself from, it's directing your attention away from your self-judgments, your self-loathing. And that's, I try to be aware of projection. And so that just struck me. So thanks for sharing that.
That's a profound thing, Christian, because our life experience is a mirror. How we experience the world is a mirror of what we are. And so when we don't see that, we don't see projection, but the fact of the matter is that I get a great revelation of the degree of self-hatred I have when I watch TV and watch politicians, because sometimes the vehement hatred that I can feel for them. Does that make sense? I know that when I come to my senses, I know what that is. That's my own self-hatred being projected. And that helps me a great deal. So what you're saying is extremely important. That is a very important point.
Yeah, because you can feel like you got it all, together and you all in harmony and at peace. But if you get angry at those politicians, that shows you that there's still work to be done inside. So that was good.
That's exactly right. Because you're falling away from being loving. And you're feeling righteous about your hatred, which is crazy.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Smita.
Yeah. When we consciously follow dharma, you are in your natural state of being, and you do things in accordance to what is to be done in a given situation with a proper attitude, and even at the cost of not liking doing it, but slowly it becomes as natural as breathing, and then that's where the transformation happens. And you're with yourself, and it slowly grows on you, and you feel the light of wisdom shining on you, and it helps you to see things in the right perspective.
Yes, very good. Because for Dayananda, You know, that graceful acceptance he talks about, when that becomes the one attitude that you face everything, what's happening in you, what other people are doing, what the circumstances you're in, that frees you from emotional reactivity.
Yeah.
So it clears the board, and because it does that, it gives opportunity for the presence of God to obtain in you as qualities like peace and freedom and all of this sort of stuff. But you're then being the life, light, and fullness that is God. But that's God's gift to you, is he gives you his life as your life, doesn't he? So the thing is but that cannot occur when we're without this feeling of more and more acceptance. And we can feel this. If you notice that when you're just simply being accepting, it's not that life becomes very simple then, because there's no friction.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So this whole thing of learning to live an accepting life is so very, very important. So very good point, Smita. Stephen, has Aria gone away, or they gone away? I can't hear you, Stephen.
I'm not sure, Bede. I know they were trying to fit this talk into their time today, so maybe they ran out of time. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So all I suggest you do for the next month is this understanding that be really tough on yourself. Does that make sense? So when you find yourself, the red flags are this: as soon as you find yourself in a sort of a friction, a state of friction, you know you're lost. Now that friction will manifest either as friction with myself, like you were talking about, Stephen, or friction with other people, or friction with the world. But the moment you do that, if you just go quiet and just simply go, okay, I'm just going to find a relation to what's happening. I don't have to like what's happening, but I can be at peace in myself in the face of what's happening, even if it's unpleasant. That's what we saw Dayananda. Dayananda was, when he was dying physically, he was incredibly relaxed in himself. So he was relaxed in himself in the face of a very painful and unpleasant experience. Does that make sense? But so we can learn to be relaxed and accepting in ourselves, even in the face of, and this is what he meant by yoga. This is the practice of sameness. But what we'll do next month is, can you remind me? So otherwise I'll forget. But we'll deal with this whole thing of highlighting. Do you know what I mean? So we'll deal with this. What do we do when we're just caught in a kind of a mood and we just don't quite know what to do? You know, all of that stuff. Do you know what I mean? So we'll deal with that when we come. But can I say it's been very, very nice catching up with all of you again as usual. And
Thank you, Bede.
Thank you.
look after yourselves, and we will see you again in a month's time. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay.
Michelle, can you stay back for a tick? Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
We'll see you next
Bye-bye.
time.
Thank you.